welcome back to the show. It's me, Phil Vischer. I am here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, Phil.
Hi.
This is filthy.
Who is... and Sky Jatani, who's already complaining.
Yes.
About the desk, which he says is very filthy.
Well,
it's really my section.
It is
of
your
the desk.
section.
I guess I shouldn't complain. Sorry.
You shouldn't be, telling everyone.
I'm going to sing the theme song as me, because I just am. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. We'll talk to Sky.
Hi, Phil.
And Christian, too.
Hi, Phil.
Now say hi, boys and girls.
Hello, boys and girls.
That's nice. And maybe a guest. No guest here for you.
Not today.
Not today. Hey, it's a podcast, so lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here.
Very nice.
I thought you were going to hit that upper octave there for a second.
No, that's why the ukulele does it. Plinky Pete goes where I don't have to go.
Awesome.
He takes the hit for me. School. School's back in session.
Yeah, my kids started yesterday.
Your
Praise
kids started
God.
yesterday. Your kids,
Mine
did they
too.
start? Mine have not started yet.
That's because they're in private school.
Yeah, because they're in private school. So my daughter, I only have one kid left who's not in college or beyond. One kid left at home, and she's a senior in high school.
You're almost done.
You are almost an empty nester.
I know, and that's when the fun starts.
Yeah, so I hear.
That's when my life begins.
No.
That's a terrible thing to say. And then my son's starting his sophomore year at Wheaton College.
Woohoo!
Moves back in on Saturday.
Way to go, Jeremy.
My youngest just started first grade, so we're in a new phase here, too, where
Yes, you
no
are.
kids at home during the day.
Totally new.
Yeah.
How was New York?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
What did you do?
I met with some of our fantastic listeners.
Yeah,
Heather and Simon were just awesome. They gave me tours of New York.
No
and
way.
We ate lunch in Bryant Park, and we told awesome stories. I learned all about how they became Christians and how they
cool.
started listening to our podcast. And then they took me to the Empire State Building. Actually, I took them because
So-
they'd never been.
They'd never been to the Empire State
to the
Building.
top?
So you took
Yeah,
them.
Heather had been as a young child, but she didn't remember. And Simon refused to ever go to the Empire State Building, but
On principle?
I guess so. But he came anyway, and we had a
Simon
great
didn't
time.
say.
Yeah, Simon didn't say. He actually wore a Captain America shirt that day, so I said I was just going to say he was Captain America, but I didn't.
Wow.
It was Simon.
Okay.
So thank you guys. That was awfully fun. And the other
Okay.
people that showed up for breakfast,
That's
Jack
cool.
and yeah.
That's cool.
I'm going to be in New York on Sunday and Monday after you hear this podcast, so I'm not going to meet up with anyone.
But you spoke at Rick Warren's church?
Sort of.
Sort of spoke at Rick
I
Warren's
spoke
church?
at the Saddleback Retreat Center
Oh, okay.
last
They have
Friday.
a retreat center that's separate from the church?
Yeah, it's in it's further south.
Okay.
It's amazing. It's a beautiful
Really?
old hacienda ranch. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and we had a great turnout. A couple hundred people there for a wonderful evening.
Why did they come? What were you talking about?
I was mostly talking about my book
okay.
With all that content.
Okay.
So I walked through the whole book with them and did all the little doodles and drawings, and
That's
it was
cool.
a wonderful. Yeah,
And it was well received?
yeah, very well. Everyone got a copy of the book. I didn't even know they were doing that.
Wow.
Oh, that's very cool.
And then
Did they pay full retail for the books, or did they get some crazy ministry
I have
discount?
no idea how Saddleback handled that. I think they got it for free, but I don't know. I think they may have had to pay to be a part of the retreat thing. I don't know what went on.
okay.
And then I spoke Sunday morning at Park Crest Church in Long Beach, California.
Okay.
Which was also, they were great hosts. Very
Because
nice
you were
people.
in the neighborhood?
Well,
How
I
did
was,
those two things end up happening on the same weekend?
I was signed up to speak at Park Crest Church, and then my friend at Saddleback told me, hey, next time you're out here, let me know because we want to do a retreat with you. So I was like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm going to be out there to speak at Park Crest. And he said, oh, great, I'll set up the retreat. So that happened.
That's cool.
And I had other stuff to do out there as well. Visited my brother and some other things. But Southern California, not a bad place
It
to visit.
rocks.
But you didn't go to Disneyland.
I drove past it numerous times. I did. I have to confess that one night I was there. I had a free evening, and I'd never been out to see the Queen Mary. Not the person, the ship.
Right.
The 1936 ocean liner. Quite a history. Really neat. It was fun. So I went out and
Did you go on it?
I did. I went on it.
And what was it like?
It was old. And
Do you feel like you were stepping back in a time capsule?
you really well. I happen to know something about this ship for ridiculous reasons, but the amount of history, like this ship was instrumental in actually winning World War II.
Oh, stop it.
Well, it was.
You know how many different things I've heard.
Well, no, because here's the thing: is there were only a handful of ocean liners large enough to transport troops from the United States to Europe, and the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth and one or two others, Normandy, were the only ships large enough to really transport massive numbers of troops. So they converted. They called her the Gray Ghost because they painted her gray, so that she'd be harder to spot by German U-boats. And the ability of these ships to escape the U-boats and transport all those troops, because they didn't fly them over. They you know, there was transatlantic things. So that ship was huge in actually getting American troops to Europe to fight the war, and lots of other interesting stories.
Pretty cool.
And was it retired after the war? Was it ever put back into service?
Oh yeah, it went back into service. It didn't retire until 1967. I think after jetliners started making ships obsolete.
Ferrying people.
Right. Yeah. So then they transported it to Long Beach and made it a permanent
Do you see any correlation between cruise ships and churches?
Just a little. Has anyone read those articles I wrote that got the rounds on my blog?
Yeah, we don't have to go into that.
No, we don't.
But that was, I wanted to mention this 2 weeks ago and we ran out of time. Then I wanted to mention it last week and I ran out of time. But I tweeted about it because I was really sad about Robin Williams dying. And I was trying to figure out why. And it's partly because he just seemed like such a good guy. Mm-hmm. You know, anytime he did something, like there are those funny comedian actors that make you laugh, but you know, if it comes down to a scene where they're supposed to make you cry or feel something, they just can't really pull it off. Mm-hmm. So they kind of fake their way through it. You know, and he just wasn't that. There was there was part of me that thought I can see how he was sad because he brought that out so realistically.
Well, he got an Oscar for Good Will Hunting, which was a very dramatic role.
Yeah,
with some humor, but it was mostly...
And did you see The Fisher King? Do you remember The Fisher King, the Terry Gilliam film?
Vaguely.
That was, he plays a man whose wife is killed in a senseless shooting inspired by a radio DJ, a shock jock, saying something. And he kind of goes crazy and ends up being homeless. And the shock jock falls into depression, ends up quitting his job, is played by Jeff Bridges, and ends up meeting him. Just meeting this homeless guy and realizing he's homeless because of what he did. It's really moving film, and it's, you know, and Robin Williams just had that ability to portray just kind of a sadness, you know, that you know, and it almost makes me think of Mel Gibson as someone else who's like, okay, there's more going on behind there. You know, like Mel Gibson in Signs, if you've ever seen Signs, is so sad. Or in the Lethal Weapon films, you know, when he plays crazy, it's like, wow, he's really good at playing crazy.
Some people think, you know.
Well, what you're saying is those emotions are very accessible, easily accessible to him. And, you know, I do think, you know, I'm in this industry, and that's generally true for a lot of the actors that are very successful. They've had a lot of stuff to draw on. And so it's those that can make it easily accessible that profoundly affect us.
Right.
And I think, I was extremely sad too. And then I heard he had the beginning stages of Parkinson's.
Right.
And I wondered, you know, when somebody's that full of life and that, just successful, and you find out you have this debilitating disease, I kind of wonder if it's that there's that feeling of, I want to go out when I'm still at the top of my game kind of thing. Yeah. Because there's so many people that say, I don't want to live in this degenerative state. And I wonder if that played
another
a role.
factor, which I don't know the media's talked that much about, is 2009 he had open heart surgery. And a lot of people aren't aware, but particularly men who have open heart surgery have a high degree of depression afterwards. There's something that gets wacky when you crack the sternum, that it actually changes chemical compositions in the brain. And a lot of them get severely depressed afterwards. Wow. So that could be... And then, of course, he had his own struggles with addiction over the years and all kinds of
all
other
sorts of stuff. And, you know, my first thought, when something like that happens, and someone who's an amazing artist or someone that I really admire, you know, and they're not a believer... and they do something to themselves, or they just fall into, you know, a very sad state. You know, I have this initial first impulse of, if only they had Jesus.
Right.
You know, if he had Jesus, then everything would have been okay. And I always have to kind of stop myself and say, wait a minute, there are people who have Jesus that struggle with issues too. You know, there are people who have Jesus that have ended up in very sad, very, very dark places. And it reminded me of Tim Keller did a message on spiritual warfare, which was kind of interesting, you know, in Manhattan today, talking about like there is a Satan. But then he talked about how you balance it out when he's doing pastoral care. So basically, when he's counseling someone, he said there are people who will say everything is spiritual. You know, so if you're having a problem, Jesus can solve it. Whatever it is, you're depressed, you know, you're bipolar, whatever you've got, Jesus can solve your problem. And then there are people who say, you know, no, what you need is therapy. You know, you've got childhood stuff, you've got repressed emotions and memories. You need therapy.
Or you need a drug.
And the third group says, no, it's brain chemistry.
Yeah.
You need medication, you know. And what I loved about what Keller said, because this was coming from a point of doing pastoral ministry, is in his experience, usually it's all of the above.
Right. We're integrated people.
Right. It is never, because you are a victim of your brain chemistry, and you are a victim of childhood experiences and traumas, and you are a victim of a spiritual world, you know, and there is a redemptive factor in coming to Christ and things that change about your outlook on life, but it doesn't necessarily rewrite your brain chemistry. You know, it doesn't necessarily just erase childhood trauma. So, and I really appreciated that because it helps you look at a case like Robin Williams and resist being so kind of Christian simplistic to say, well, that's because he wasn't a Christian.
Or judgmental.
Yeah, in a sense. Like Westboro Baptist Church, which is going to protest at his funeral.
Well, I think...
No, they're not.
They are.
No, his ashes were already...
They're doing a second service. The first one, they scattered his ashes in San Francisco Bay, and now they're doing that was a private thing, and now they're doing a public thing in Westboro.
What are they protesting?
He was pro-gay marriage, and he played gay or cross-dressing people in several films. The Birdcage.
The Birdcage, yeah.
But it's, So one of his comedian friends has offered... this is actually pretty funny. Sent out an open letter to Westboro Baptist Church and said, why don't you go someplace where Christians are really being persecuted, like in Iraq right now, where they're actually being threatened with death. I will pay for all of you first-class airfare to send you to Iraq.
Wow.
So that's fun.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
So,
did they take? They didn't take him up on it, I guess.
As of yet, they have not taken him up.
I had a conversation with my mom about maybe the day or two after Robin Williams' death, and I was kind of talking to her about why has this affected me so much? Because celebrities die all the time. It's kind of like, oh, whatever. And I realized when Mork and Mindy came out, which was sort of his big breakthrough, right? I think I was 2 years old.
Oh, wow. Boy, does that put things in perspective for me.
It was 1978, right? So I was 2 years old, and I was 12. I wasn't watching it when I was 2, but I remember watching all the reruns and the syndicated versions of it. So in one form or another, he's always been in the background of my life, and my cultural reference points, whether it's movies or his comedy or the TV shows he did. So it was one of those first celebrities I have no living memory of my life without Robin Williams being there somewhere. And so when someone like that is suddenly gone, you feel like, oh, that was kind of a fixed point of reference.
But hasn't Charlie Sheen always been around for most of your life?
And he still is.
It's not the same.
I'm just saying
it's not the same.
It's also who he was.
It was. Yeah, absolutely. I think Robin Williams was an incredibly gifted person, and I don't really care much about what his politics or theology was. He was an incredibly gifted person who brought a lot of laughter to me and many others.
Did you see David Letterman's tribute to Robin Williams?
No, I saw some others.
He did about 10 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, because he was at the Comedy Store at the same time Robin Williams broke there. So he says, I knew him for 36 years. He was on this show 50 times.
Oh, that's so hard.
You know, and so he played highlights from Robin Williams being on the show over, 30 years, however long Letterman's done it. Robin Williams has been a guest.
Yeah, he was the best
years.
late night guest
Yeah, he was.
ever on any show he was on.
And it was really moving. And or Jimmy Fallon's tribute, which ended up with him standing up on his desk saying, Captain, my captain.
Yeah.
I haven't seen.
Forgot about that one.
If you go back and watch the Inside the Actors Studio with Robin Williams, where they get into his whole life, even there he's hysterically funny, and he improvs with some woman's scarf in the audience, and it was a really fascinating mix because there you see the serious side of Robin Williams and his history and his backstory, and yet throughout there's these bursts of improv and funniness, and what an amazing person.
Well, and I think what makes it so difficult is that he was so real and open and vulnerable. So in the downtimes, the interviews, like the one they keep playing from Larry King, he's open about his demons and his struggles, and yet he keeps overcoming them. And I think that's what made this end so hard.
Like, wait, why?
Yeah.
Why did you pack it in? Why? I was sad about that.
Me too.
And the world is going a little bit crazy.
Oh, really?
Have you
Is
noticed?
this something
Yes,
new?
I have noticed.
Really?
Well, Ferguson, Missouri, the Gaza Strip, ISIL in Iraq.
Yeah.
Everyone's saying different
Syria.
things.
It's ISIS.
Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL.
Right.
Someone just
so
pick a
we,
name.
as a country, are bombing a group of people because they are trying to set up an Islamic caliphate.
Yeah, and they're making direct threats against the United States.
And Chicago, too. Did you hear that one?
Yeah.
There's a building in Chicago they're saying that they're in and they're watching and they're going to.
What's
was this
I
morning.
was just talking to a friend about this. What's so creepy is how many Westerners are being recruited.
Yeah.
Like
I hadn't heard that.
Oh yeah, they're recruiting from England and the United States.
The guy who beheaded the journalist had a London accent.
Yeah, they call him.
I didn't
He's part
see
of a
that.
group they call the Beatles. There's four young men who are all from England who went to Syria, who work for ISIS now, who've climbed the
But
ranks.
are they Muslims?
Yeah, they're Muslims.
Okay.
But
Which makes more sense than if they're just.
yeah, but they were born and raised in Western democracies. So it isn't like they were from some backwater in the Middle East.
The whole narrative about, we'll just get more and more secular and then more and more peaceful, and it just is like blowing up.
Yeah.
It's the end of Western civilization as we know
Could
it.
be. I don't know.
Especially if nobody's having babies.
This is true.
This whole podcast is taking a very dark turn.
I know. I'm a little.
What's your next story?
I'm a little bit blue. Okay, can I turn it around?
Yeah, let's hear it.
On a lighter note,
There we go.
that's actually what I have written next.
No, really?
Do you write your transitions?
No, I just wrote this one because it was so out of joint with the topic before it. On a lighter note, a family in Alabama caught a 15-foot-long, 1,000-pound alligator. Biggest alligator ever caught in the state of Alabama. And it was a family.
They all caught it together?
Yes.
They all jumped on top of it?
A family battled a 1,000-pound alligator for more than 5 hours, putting several large hooks into the beast before firing a fatal shotgun blast to the gator's head.
It's like Moby Dick.
Yeah.
15-foot long, 1,011 pounds. The first attempt to weigh the gator destroyed a winch state biologists typically use, so they had a backhoe lift it.
Oh, gosh.
It was caught by Mandy and John Stokes, brother-in-law Kevin Jenkins, and his children, 16-year-old Savannah and 14-year-old Parker. So it was a family outing.
Well, had this alligator been plaguing them or something?
No, they were gator hunting. So
They meant to catch it.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
They were out in a...
It wasn't doing anything bad?
They were out in a 17... It
wasn't eating their sheep?
It didn't burglarize their house. It didn't kill their grandmother.
Wow.
They sound like they're ripe for a reality TV show.
Here's my favorite part. They were interviewed. Tell us about this catch.
Did they praise Jesus?
They said, we give all the glory to God.
For making this beast that we then killed and destroyed.
Just Mandy... the mom is the one who actually shot it. They had all these hooks in it. Mandy Stokes aimed her 20-gauge shotgun at the sweet spot behind the alligator's eyes, just as she'd been told during a mandatory training class for Alabama gator hunters. She pulled the trigger, but the gator's head was too far beneath the water surface. All it did was make this gator mad. She told this site. Fear had taken hold at that point. The gator dragged the 17-foot boat across the creek into a tree, and they all fell over, but not out of the boat, fortunately.
Wow.
And then she got a second try and shot it again in the back of the head and killed it.
This is such a great sermon illustration.
And
This is such a lighter note. We're back to talking about killing. You sort of roped us in.
Why did this grab your attention, Phil?
We give all the glory to God. That's what grabbed my attention.
Hey, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do it all to the glory of God.
What was
1 Corinthians 10.
What was God's reaction to that? Like, I didn't tell you to kill that gator.
I think his reaction was...
He could have been happy they were doing something as a family. That doesn't happen this much, you know.
I think his reaction was, yeehaw. Right? Hey, the family that hunts gators together stays together.
Yeah, I guess so.
Hopefully, they ate the gator meat, so it wasn't just for, sport.
Yeah, they're going to
They got to mount that thing
They're going to
somewhere.
taxidermy it.
There you go.
They're going to taxidermy it. Okay.
They're going to sell tickets to see it.
Okay, that just caught my eye. I'm sorry, that just caught my eye because I was not expecting that to be the first thing they said.
Are you making fun of them?
Was we give glory to God that we killed this gator. And it was a big one.
I think it
We
would have
broke
been
the
different.
record.
I think it would have been different if this gator had been like terrorizing a community.
I agree with you.
Or
Right.
ruining the
Right.
local businesses
or if it
something.
broke into their house and it had them all cornered in the bathroom.
Or if it was eating their
and it
dogs or
had an
small
axe
children.
And it was trying to break in, then you say, please, Lord, help us kill this gator. I'm a little iffy on going out hunting, killing something, and then
for sport.
and then glorifying God.
Is it any
that
different
you-
than a football player in the end zone?
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
It is.
It is.
Why?
Because,
It's one. They're just
first of
different
all,
sports.
they're actually killing something.
Yeah, but it's a sport in a lot of people's eyes.
Well, yeah, and I'm not anti-hunting. This isn't about being anti-hunting. It's, if you're
Well, the question is God on the gator side or is God on the family
who
side?
is God cheering for?
Well, what's the difference between that and a football team who's saying
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
But they're not. If they have decent theology, they're not thanking God for defeating the opponent. They're thanking God for their performance.
And their
what if it's
abilities.
a Florida Gator football?
Okay.
Moving on.
Let's go back to England, shall we?
Yes, let's.
Now, this story was
But
sent
should
in.
we all talk in an English accent?
I got a story sent in by Tina Holman Simpson. She's one of our listeners. Tina Holman Simpson. Hi, Tina Holman Simpson.
Hi, Tina.
Any relation to A.B. Simpson?
No, I think she's related to Homer. I think she's one of the Simpsons. What's the daughter's name?
Lisa.
Lisa Simpson, and then their cousin Tina Holman Simpson. Oh. Is her cousin. I think it's Lisa Simpson's cousin.
Okay.
Okay, this was on Richard Dawkins' website. It was an essay written by a female atheist, Sue Blackmore. She says, I'm still shaken by yesterday's lecture and its aftermath. Oxford in the 21st century was, I'd fondly assumed, the epitome of somewhere I could speak freely and fully and expect people to listen and then argue and disagree if they wish to. Apparently not. I was invited to give a lecture on memes. Do you know what a meme is?
I do.
Okay, you know what a meme is?
Yeah, the internet thing.
Well, it's an idea that spreads like a virus.
Right.
Do you know who came up with the term?
No.
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins.
Did he really?
Yeah, he invented the idea of the meme. I was invited to give a lecture on memes by the Oxford Royal Academy, an institution that has nothing to do with Oxford University, but hosts groups of several hundred 17 and 18-year-olds for 2 weeks of classes, and I guess some kind of simulation of an Oxford experience. I was told they were of 45 nationalities, and I assumed many different religions, so I prepared my lecture carefully. So she's talking about memes, how ideas spread. And she had them try to generate their own memes. And then she said, then I arrived at religion. Because that's kind of Richard Dawkins' point, is that religion is a meme. It's a virus that spreads.
It's a disease.
I pointed out that religion demands lots of resources, showed them pictures of a church, a Hindu temple, a Jewish menorah, and Muslim pilgrims on Hajj. They pose threats to health. Religions pose threats to health. I showed pictures of people purifying their souls by wading into the stinking germ-laden Ganges. And they make people do strange things. I showed rows of Muslims bent over with their heads on the floor. I hadn't gone far with this before 5 or 6 young men got up and began to walk out. I said, excuse me, would you mind telling me why you are leaving? One of them said, you are offending us. We will not listen. And they left. Soon after that, another bunch left, and then another. I explain the idea of religions as memeplexes. They package up a set of doctrines, tell believers to learn them, to pass them on, to have faith and not doubt, and they ensure obedience with fearsome threats and ridiculous promises. This I illustrated with images of Christian heaven and hell. Then I read from the Quran a verse about what the rewards you get if you're good or the punishments you get if you're bad. More walked out. By the time I arrived at a slide calling religions viruses of the mind, the lecture hall was looking rather empty. Outside, afterwards, some young Muslims were waiting for me. I was angrily told that I'd made them feel ignorant. She staggered up High Street, confused and upset, both at what had happened and at what I said and had not said. What should I have done? They are ignorant, aren't they? Isn't that why they've come to this city of learning? Even if not Oxford University itself, to learn? Was I a coward to apologize? Were my attempts to be reasonable the best way of engaging them, or just plain cowardice? Should I have said that the Quran, like the Old Testament, is a foul book full of hatred and violence, that they hold the beliefs they do only because they were infected with this horrible religion when they were too young to object, that they could escape? So it ends with her in depression.
Were there Christians who walked out? Or
It seems to be primarily Muslims.
Yeah.
Except that she went up to the organizer of the conference afterwards for support, and he didn't look happy with her. And she said, "Are you religious?" And he said, "I am a Christian." Mm-hmm. So I found this interesting because of false assumptions. And I've seen this in a couple, even some of the atheists that I've interacted with, where they have no experience of rational people being religious anymore. So if you're invited to speak, in Oxford, England,
you assume it's a completely secular
to
audience.
Smart students, you assume they have all given up on religion. And when you discovered that you're actually, and her point is, I was careful what I said. Well, she said, the promises of religions are ridiculous.
It sounds like what she meant by being careful was she was going to offend everybody.
Yes.
Not just one particular religious
She said
group.
she was careful to talk about many religions.
Yeah.
Christians are stupid, Muslims are stupid, Hindus are stupid. See?
This is very thoughtful of her.
I haven't offended anyone.
Right.
So Richard Dawkins posted this on his site as a way of, it's kind of hand-wringing. What are we going to do? It's a deplorable state of the world when people aren't rejecting religion like we thought. And then you look at what's going on in the Middle East and say, well, yeah. But even wealthy, privileged kids that are being sent by their parents for special educational experiences in Oxford might be religious.
It kind of strikes me as a white person who's grown up post-civil rights in a very diverse community who thinks they can say whatever they want about other religion or other races because they're clearly not racist, not realizing that you're a white person saying offensive things about other races, even though you don't think of yourself that way. Does that make any sense?
That's a good analogy.
They're completely oblivious to the realities of how people identify racially. In this case, she's completely oblivious to how people identify religiously.
My friend, Peter Boghossian, who I consider a friend when he was on Justin Brierley's show.
Unbelievable.
And Justin said, so do you actually think that people that have religious beliefs are mentally ill?
Right.
And he says, well, yes, I do. But you don't want to offend anyone. Well, no, I think we should have reasoned discourse.
Right.
We'll pick one.
Yeah.
Well, and
call your opponent mentally ill or have reasoned discourse.
What I think is, the most offensive thing is that she is asserting her beliefs as fact.
Effectively, yeah.
In a sense, they're what she believes and saying, this is the truth. These things are a fact.
And because she thought afterwards, well, didn't they know who I am when they invited me? Don't they know that I'm an outspoken atheist? And I think what the organizer of the conference would have said is, well, you wrote a book on memes, and memes are an interesting concept. You were invited to do a talk on memes, not to discredit religion.
I think she's showing her own bias in how she...
Haven't we all decided that religion is just a virus of the mind?
I want to defend her a little bit.
Okay. I think I just defended her by saying she assumed...
Well, no, I think
I'm not attacking her.
There's another... No.
Sky.
So I'm thinking back to when I was an undergrad at a State University, and I was in the religion department, the comparative religion department. I had professors who were all over the spectrum with their own philosophies and stuff. So my New Testament professor was, I think safe to say, not a Christian. And yet the New Testament classes tended to attract evangelical students because they wanted to learn about the New Testament. And invariably, over the course of the course, the Christians would all sit together, and all the non-Christians would sit together. And every time the teacher said anything about an interpretation of the New Testament that they didn't like, for example, well, a lot of scholars don't think the Apostle Paul actually wrote 2 Corinthians. And they would flip out on her. The evangelicals would go nuts, and they would defend the authorship of 2 Corinthians, and they would argue with the professor.
Who were you sitting with?
I didn't sit with either side. I was just kind of in the middle.
Sure.
And honestly,
you were in the corner.
No, but
with
here's
the tall,
and
pointy
eventually
hat.
I had to talk to some of my friends who were the more conservative evangelical Christians in the class who were not part of the religion department, and I had to say to them, look, guys, she's just telling you what other secular scholars think. She's not saying you have to agree.
Right.
Take it easy. You know, don't get so defensive. Don't flip out. But some of them will get really angry and really defensive because this non-Christian is saying some things about the Bible that you don't agree with. And they didn't storm out of the class, but if it were an elective lecture, they probably would have.
Michael Gungor did something like that. Do you know who Michael Gungor is?
Yeah, I know Michael
he
Gungor.
said some things
What
about
did he
the
say?
Bible. Is what we talked about
last week?
Yeah.
I wasn't here.
You didn't listen to last week.
The point is,
Sorry.
if it would take an awful lot for me to march out of a lecture because somebody's saying something I disagree with.
Yeah.
In other words, we're all offended way too easily.
But you also think differently than a lot of people in that you want to truly understand what people that differ from you think. And you want to understand their perspective. And, you know, and that's been good for me to know you and to read what you're writing and to talk with you because it challenges me to do the same thing. But I feel like in some senses you're an anomaly that way.
Maybe I am.
Where
Like if these Muslim or Christian students who walked out of her lecture, if they had stayed in the lecture and actually engaged her in dialogue, for example, asking her, can you explain why you think religion is the same as these other memes or whatever, or memes. Sorry, or dialogue with her afterwards and say, you know, just to let you know, there's a lot of us here who are religious believers, and the way you presented those ideas were actually rather offensive.
Do you think 17 and 18-year-olds are prepared to do that?
is that how old they were?
Yeah.
Well, okay,
Probably not.
Fair enough. But
so
in general, religious communities tend to cultivate a high sensitivity to offense,
Right.
which you see all over the internet.
And some tribalism.
A lot of tribalism.
So in essence, what you had was a specific tribe in the setting saying, hey, you've just insulted our tribe.
Well, and it's also a mark of fundamentalism.
We're voting with our feet.
A mark of fundamentalism is a complete inability to entertain, let alone tolerate, opposing ideas.
Right.
And I think it's really, really dangerous.
Well, clearly
So you
it's
think
dangerous.
they should have stayed?
I would have hoped if there were Christians in the audience, they would have done the charitable thing and stayed and talked to her more directly in dialogue about, hey, you know what, maybe you need to engage more religious believers so that you learn how to present these ideas without being quite as offensive.
I think you might have been able to articulate that
That's
when
what I said.
you were
He's an
17 or
anomaly.
18. I'm not sure how many of the
But
I think it's good for us to. I think it's great for you to present a different way of thinking about things, and I think it's
But
very.
How often do we say, "Oh, if you find my message offensive, vote with your feet. Just don't buy the album. Don't watch the show."
Fine, but these are people who go to Oxford or whatever this Oxford lecture thing
Royal
was. It's like, do
something
they
like
expect it to just toe the party line on Islamic beliefs?
They were voting with their feet that they don't like religion being insulted in their lectures.
Yeah. I think it's that kind of inability to tolerate one another's presence that is not good for Western civilization.
I do agree with that.
Yeah. Well, what about people just assuming that everyone already agrees that religion is all
Right,
religion
which is exactly
false?
why they should have said to her, hey, you know what? We think you have a lot of intelligent things to say about these ideas, but the way you're engaging religion shows you're really ignorant about religion.
Could we make a video where we were role playing and I was a secular college professor and you're an 18-year-old, and then you can show how to
but
engage.
we have to get like Duck Dynasty stars and a bunch of other Christian celebrities to have cameos.
I might be able to get Kirk Cameron.
There you go.
I think I have an in.
And then we'll market it right through youth groups.
Okay, we got some good feedback from last week's show that raised other questions. We talked about Michael Gungor. We also talked about Mark Driscoll. And Solomon Parker had a really good response, which I thought I'd bring up because he was asking Sky a question directly. Here you go, Sky.
I'll try not to be offended.
Sky, what do you do when a person listens to a podcast pastor more than they listen to their own pastor?
Do Phil and Christian and I qualify?
No, you're the only one that's ordained.
That's true.
We're not podcast pastors. We're hangers on. We're hangering on you.
The Phil Vischer podcast.
Yeah, it's all about Sky. Solomon says, I'm in a church planting project in Denver, and I don't really have a pastor right now, so I listen to Greg Boyd. And that's not saying Greg Boyd is my podcast pastor. I listen to everybody who teaches there as if I was attending every Sunday, which I kind of do just from my living room in my underwear. I added that. He didn't say that, but I like that idea. One interesting thing about Boyd's church, Woodland Hills, is that, do you know Greg Boyd?
I do.
Okay. Personally?
Yes.
That's fantastic. One thing about his church, Woodland Hills, is that they actively embrace podrissioners, which is what they call them, trying to bring them into the fold spiritually and financially. Sadly, we've equated pastors with preaching. Pastor is a verb as well as a noun. When one pastors a congregation, that involves far more than just what happens Sunday morning. A megachurch separates this pastor from his flock. There's no way any man can pastor 1,000 people. Anthropological studies have shown that the average person can only keep track of about 150 individual friends and acquaintances. I feel we should separate the offices of pastor and teacher and abandon the silly idea of teaching pastor.
I totally agree.
But that's my own opinion. Sky, what do you think?
I totally agree with that. For a long time when I was on staff at my church, my title was assistant teaching pastor, and yet most of what I did was preaching. And there's a big difference between the two. Anyway, this has been a dynamic of Christianity since the first century.
What?
It really has.
What are you talking about, Sky?
Paul would write his letters, his epistles, right? Yeah. And they'd be copied and they'd be circulated to various churches. And when
Which
Paul's
was podcasting, first century podcasting.
It was media, right? It's a form of media in the first century. And Paul's letters would be read in these congregations. And of course, being an apostle, there was some authority in his writing and instruction. Right. But his letters were never a substitute for an incarnate pastoral leader or leaders in a local community.
So, which we assume they all had.
Yeah.
That's what Timothy was.
Right, and that's exactly what Paul says in Ephesians and elsewhere in Timothy, appoint elders who can teach and lead and, who's witness
of. So Paul was like Billy Graham, and Timothy was like Max Lucado.
But what we've done in the 20th and 21st century is essentially... I'm getting there.
Correct? Oh, okay.
Sort of, but what we've done is saying, well, you don't really need the incarnate pastor anymore. You can just engage through a podcast or a radio program or internet now.
TV.
And part of that's a result of the evangelical idea that the medium doesn't matter. All that matters is the content, is the message. And so I think it's a very, very dangerous thing. But ideally, it's fine to engage books, letters, podcasts, whatever content you're getting as a form of teaching. But we should all still find ourselves accountable to a local congregation with local incarnate relationship-based authority.
Right.
And it's when we disconnect from those things and only engage via media that we get a very warped understanding of what the Christian life is really supposed to be. And I think it's doing quite a bit of damage in the American church.
And how many Christian authors or Christian speakers have you bumped into who, if you really press them, have to acknowledge, I'm not really part of a church community right now? A lot. I travel too much, or I just don't.
A lot. There's quite a few. And that's why I brought up last week with Drew that one of the things that's happened in the American church is because we have a low ecclesiology or a low view of church leadership, it really falls to our parachurch organizations like Christian publishers, Christian conference organizers, Christian radio program producers.
Worship music writers
and producers and distributors. Those groups end up becoming the gatekeepers on the orthodoxy and teaching that permeates evangelicalism. but so few people in those roles care at all about what you're teaching or the quality of what you're communicating. It all comes down to, does it sell? Will it draw an audience? So business is becoming the arbiter of what's orthodoxy. And that
doesn't seem like a good thing.
It's a terrible thing. And I think it's exactly what leads to the problems that we're seeing in so many celebrity pastors right now there's been no gatekeepers.
Right.
There's been no authority over them.
If it sells,
other than the marketplace.
It must be orthodox.
Right. So that's
or
why
it must be orthodox, or it becomes orthodox.
It becomes orthodox because it's popular.
Yeah.
So that's all the more reason why we need to have a local pastor engaging us and shepherding us and saying, hey, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't be listening to such and such person because of these things or others. But we don't like that idea.
No, because then we'll leave.
Don't you feel like
church.
along with that, part of, something that's really important is being in the community and part of a body. So I hear you saying, it's important to be under that leadership.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be ordained leadership.
Right. But I think it's also, being part of a body and a community and worshiping together. There's, you experience the divine in the midst of that. And I think that's an important part of our church experience that's been missing.
We have way overemphasized the me and Jesus dynamic rather than us and Jesus. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But the fact that somebody can get on the internet and not our question asker here, but I've heard other people who think they can just get on the internet and log on to an internet-based church in their underwear in their living room and say, I've gone to church. It's just ironic to me that of all people, we should be the very last to want to disincarnate our faith because we are people of the incarnation, and yet we think we can have a vibrant faith experience with God completely disincarnate from the body of Christ.
So my great-grandfather was technically one of the first kind of radio
It's all his fault.
superstars in the Christian world. He had more than, in the 30s, he had more than 100,000 people listening to his sermons every week on the radio. He pastored a church the entire time, and I don't think it ever would have dawned on him, hey, that's so much work. I could just stop doing that because I can raise enough money, because people sent him, his radio listeners bought him a car at one point because he didn't have a car, bought him a, Model A or whatever the Ford was at the time, so he could drive around and meet some of them. They helped.
That's pretty cool.
They helped name my great aunt. He had a contest.
That's
on
awesome.
The radio.
Seriously?
Yes.
What's her name?
Which one was it? It was Jean. It wasn't Jean. Oh no, my mom's
You
gonna
can
be
think
so
of it
mad at
later.
me.
This is kind of like asking our podcast listeners to come up with a new title for my book.
We did that. Only we need to do it with your children.
Yeah, that's
Come
going
up
a
with a
little
title
too
for
far.
your new child. But
You're having a new child?
No.
it never would have occurred
How about
to
your dog?
him
Name your dog.
that this would be enough. Just the radio thing would be enough, and I don't really need to do all that church, that incarnational stuff where everyone can talk back to me, and where you have personnel problems, and where people are, arguing over things. That was just part. I mean, that was primarily what he was, and the radio was just another way. He looked at a way to reach people who, because they were so rural or so elderly, couldn't get themselves to a church. And it was a service for them.
I think the lie that we've bought into, which your grandfather or great-grandfather did not buy into, is the belief that anything bad that can be done with media, an equal amount of good can be done with the media.
Yeah.
So I think it was when we were at Okoboji, someone was asking me about this, and I said, I think we can all agree that I could easily destroy my marriage on the internet. So a lot of bad can happen on the internet, but I cannot have a healthy marriage merely on the internet.
Right.
So, but evangelicals don't want to believe that. We want to believe that medium is completely neutral, and anything that can be used for good can be used for an equal amount of bad, and vice versa. And I want people to understand that some media can do an awful lot of damage, but the amount of good it can do is limited. It's very limited. So you can destroy your spiritual life online. It doesn't mean you can have your entire spiritual life online or through podcasts. You need the incarnate reality of how God made us.
I hear you. Michelle Kenny Harvey wrote in about the Michael Gungor story and says, are we to the point where you have to be a young earth creationist to be considered orthodox? As a Quaker, she's a Quaker. We got a listener who's a Quaker.
Love the oats.
Thanks for the oats. As a Quaker,
they got to be so sick of that joke. I mean, come on, that's so low-hanging oats right there.
They never get tired of it. I'm used to being viewed by some as already off the ranch, but it seems that taking a literal interpretation of Genesis has not historically been a litmus test of one's orthodoxy. Is the ranch getting smaller, or are a large number of normal people now living on the wrong side of the fence? I read John Walton's book, ding, and thought it was brilliant. Does that show that I lost what was left of my orthodoxy somewhere?
Interesting question.
I think it's interesting, and it's probably because we've been talking about this more, that people that aren't, there is a group for which holding to, a very specific interpretation of Genesis is the sign, not that you're Orthodox, but that you take the Bible seriously.
Right, and
if
literally.
you don't hold to that, you don't take the Bible seriously.
Which means you've probably abandoned other parts of the Bible.
So it's a canary in the mine shaft. You give up on that. And that's why Michael Gungor got in trouble, was not just because he said, I don't think the earth is young, but then he went on to say, I don't believe in a literal Adam and Eve. And for more people, like John Walton, who doesn't believe the earth is young, thinks the literal Adam and Eve is fairly important, for Pauline Christology, which we mentioned last week. So, Michelle, it depends on what circles you travel in. There are circles where that has become a part of orthodoxy. It's really a reaction to fearing that we're losing too much, with secularism and liberalism, that we're giving up too much, that we got to stop, that we got to draw a line in the sand. So everyone is trying to figure out, where do we draw the line in the sand against modernity, liberalism, whatever. And for a specific group of people,
that's the line.
Adam and Eve riding a brontosaurus has become the line in the sand. Would you say? Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I agree. Orthodoxy is very often in the eye of the beholder.
Oh,
and
that's a T-shirt.
There you go. Orthodoxy is in the eye of the brontosaurus.
That's not a T-shirt.
No.
That doesn't work at all.
It should be noted, though, that I can't think of a Christian denomination or group that includes young earth creationism among their doctrinal.
No.
Oh, I'm sure somebody will tell us about one now that you've said
maybe
that.
I can't. None comes to mind. Now, there are plenty that talk about the inerrancy of Scripture.
If there was any, you might think, well, maybe the Southern Baptists, but I've had that conversation with Southern Baptist leadership, and it's not there.
So there's liberty on that question.
They don't die on that hill.
So there's lots of people who believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. As I say in one of my points on my 10 Commandments for Interpreting the Bible, which is now available on my website, the Bible is inerrant in all that it affirms. It's figuring out what it's affirming that's difficult. So there's some people who are saying Genesis is actually affirming a 6,000-year-old earth.
Right.
Others who are saying, like John Walton, no, it's not. It's not what it's affirming. It's not what it was written to say. So that's where the things get really gray. And for most Christian communities that I'm aware of, schools, universities, colleges, Christianity Day, many other places, the issue of young earth, old earth is one of Christian liberty and interpretation. It's not a mark of orthodoxy.
What about tattoos?
Right.
I hope they're okay because I have one.
Do you really?
I do, but it's a fish.
Well, as long as it's a Jesus.
And I have a nose piercing now.
Justin Bieber got a big Jesus on the back of his calf. Christian has a big Justin Bieber on the back of her calf.
No, I do not.
It's beautiful.
No, I do not.
Justin's always watching you.
I do not.
What if you had a tattoo of Justin Bieber's calf on your calf? So it was a Jesus on a calf, on your calf.
That would not translate well.
That's like looking into two different mirrors and having it just go on for infinity.
That's like existential.
That's messed up.
That is messed up. Okay, we're about out of time, but we had one more comment that I wanted to read from J.T. Adamson, who said, loving the podcast. It has brought deep meaning and humor to fixing my radiator, driving to work, and shoveling horse poop.
That's why we're here.
He added parenthetically, literally, not a rude metaphor. So he really does shovel horse poop while listening to our podcast.
That's awesome.
There's more.
So he basically associates us with manure, is what he's saying.
This is a great accomplishment.
We make the manure smell better.
Yeah. The problem
we take away the stink.
The problem is now I'm obsessed and I want to listen to the more current episodes first, but doing so creates a memento-like podcast experience where I experience the episodes in reverse order. Follow-up questions get asked first, then the original issues get discussed. I'm thinking of covering myself in tattoos. What should I do? I need help from funny Christians.
That's a reference to
You ever see the movie
Christopher
Memento?
Nolan movie. Yeah. It's actually really disturbing and
It is
brilliant
a very,
movie.
where Guy Pearce is the star, and he wakes up every morning with no memory of anything because he had an accident that damaged his memory.
That's like me.
And then
I had no accident.
But then he looks in the mirror and discovers that he's tattooed facts on his body and realizes that that's how he's putting things back together. So whatever he learns that night, he then tattoos onto his arm or something, and then he wakes up the next morning and has to start the whole thing again.
I didn't see this movie.
And it tells the whole story backwards.
Pretty
It put him on the map.
Remarkable
Put
storytelling.
Christopher Nolan on the map.
Well, that's the same story as Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore in.
Oh my!
What is that?
I know.
50 First Dates.
50 First Dates.
Yeah.
It is. It's the same story.
I never saw that movie.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's one of the top-rated films of all time.
Wow.
Isn't that the one? I only remember the trailer. And is that the one in Hawaii? Is it set in
Yes.
Hawaii? Because
Yes.
Adam Sandler only wants to make movies where he wants to vacation.
Yeah, right.
And
in the trailer, the old
Sean Astin is in it.
Sean Astin is
the old Hawaiian guy says, "Are you looking at me or looking at her? Because you're starting to freak me out."
That's not Hawaiian.
That's my version of Hawaiian.
Oh.
But maybe it was a Japanese guy in the trailer. I was in the trailer and it was so funny.
So you didn't see the movie?
No, I never saw the movie, but every now and then I say to my kids, "You're starting to freak me out."
It's like Groundhog Day.
It is kind of like
Really?
Groundhog.
Yeah, a little
He
bit.
makes a video. Finally, he falls in love with her, and he wants her to love him back.
Yeah.
And he can't figure out how to make this work. And of course, she kicks him out of her life.
How many times? 49
I don't know.
times? And
Maybe
then the
40.
50th
But
time?
she
But
has
anyway,
short-term memory loss.
She has
right?
short-term
Yeah.
memory loss, and so she wakes up every day and she can't remember.
Does she have tattoos all over her?
No,
Reminding her of
but
things?
he starts making a film of her whole life story, and so it's the first thing that she watches every day when she gets up. That's how he beats this, and they end up getting married and having a kid. And every day when she gets up, he plays this videotape of what has happened. It's very romantic and sweet.
At some point, that would get really long, and you'd lose your whole day. Just
I'm
trying
sure
to...
he has to. Imagine making that film every day.
Yeah, no, that's not right.
Wow. I was going to mention this at the very beginning. I once had a dream about that I was hanging out with Robin Williams.
You
to Robin
did.
Williams. I had a dream once. I was hanging out with Robin Williams in a bar, sitting on bar stools, and I was trying to make him laugh.
Did it work?
I think so. I think I just remember. I remember like, oh, it would be so awesome if
sit there
this
and-
guy thought I was funny.
Yeah. And it would.
And now the dream
Now
will
we'll never know.
happen.
I know it won't.
That's why you're
Heaven,
sad.
No, I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know about Robin Williams.
We may never know until we know.
All right, what am I singing about?
Robin Williams for sure.
Hey, JT Adamson, I'm glad we're your podcast troupe, but please don't listen while you're shoveling horse poop, because it makes us feel a little bit weird.
Not me.
But not Christian, because she's more well-balanced than we are.
And I love horses.
Hey, Solomon Parker, keep listening to your podcast preachers. It seems you understand that some of them are really teachers and they're not incarnate preachers of the word. Because Sky said only listening to podcasts is absurd. And you need to be in a church community where you can shovel horse poop together. While listening to the Phil Vischer podcast. See you next time.